Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and today I want to shed a little bit of background information into some of the discussions going around of the Japan Airlines flight crashing into a Japan Coast Guard aircraft on landing at Tokyo Haneda Airport. So, I'm sure most of you are aware of the accident by now, but let me just give a quick summary of what happened. For information, this video is recorded on the 3rd of January 2024 at 8:20 UTC, so that is the information available at this time. Japan Airlines A350-900, similar to the one shown on the screen in Microsoft Flight Simulator right now, on flight JL516 from Sapporo to Tokyo Haneda, both in Japan, with 367 passengers and 12 crew on board, landed on runway 34 right at 0847 UTC in nighttime conditions, but collided with the Japanese Coast Guard Dash 8-300 on the runway shortly after touchdown, and both aircraft burst into flames. The good news is, all occupants of the A350 were able to evacuate the airplane, and only 14 sustained injuries as of this time. The bad news is, of the Dash 8-300, 6 people are confirmed dead and 1 is in the hospital with serious injuries, being the captain of the Dash 8. So, there's a lot of confusion at the moment, and therefore I just want to state my sources for this video. So first of all, I'm using the Aviation Herald, which is my go-to source for any information relating to aviation accidents. They really do provide the most neutral and the best content, in my opinion, contrary to some news outlets which are easy to jump onto theories that you should be a little bit careful with. So based on the article of the Aviation Herald, which is constantly getting updated, so by the time you're watching this, there is a good chance that it may be updated with new information already, so do head over to read the original article, which I'm going to link in the video description below. So this video is based on the information available at that time. Now, first of all, I'm sure many of you have seen the videos linked down here and seen the pictures. Now, those are very dramatic looking pictures, but that one over here really is one that I want to emphasize on for a short moment. What we can see in here looks to me like a picture taken from just after the airplane came to a standstill, during or shortly after the evacuation. What we can see at this point is severe damage to the nose section of the airplane, which is where the impact probably occurred, and the aft part of the plane being engulfed in flames. Now, there are some videos available, like the one from which this picture is probably taken, of the entire airplane cabin being on fire. Now, at this point, you will probably be asking yourself, so how can so many passengers survive the accident then? Well, there is one major reason for it. Aircraft are usually built to contain external fires for a minimum time of 90 seconds, which is the time designated to evacuate the airplane in case of an accident. So the entire airplane will be built so that for at least 90 seconds fires are kept out and there is a habitable zone inside the airplane for that time. After 90 seconds, things can go southbound quickly. And what we see in the picture over here is the aft part of the cabin slowly turning into that deadly zone. The front part of the cabin, while probably filled with smoke, still looks evacuatable to me in this particular image over here. So that is probably how everybody got out. You can see a slide deployed at the aft door, a slide deployed at the front door, and according to the Aviation Herald article, there was another slide on the other side of the airplane, so they evacuated it using 3 slides. What we can also see up here is the impact damage on the front, but the cockpit itself still seems fine. So even though it was a frontal collision, the Dash 8 was probably so much smaller than the A350 that most of the damage occurred to the underside of the cockpit and the avionics bay and the front main gear, which we can see collapsed in this image, compared to the section where the occupants of the airplane are, a little bit further above. Now, from here on, obviously the question is, how did accidents like this happen? Well, let's start with a little bit of basic information available. We're going to start over here with the relevant weather information at the time of the accident. What we can see is we had light and variable winds turning to slight northerly winds with good visibilities and with few clouds in 2000 feet. And the earlier METAR showed that until 0900 the wind would shift to the north. The METAR from shortly after the accident showed that no significant changes were expected. Therefore, we can conclude that by looking at the METARs from slightly after the accident, showing very low visibilities here, 2000 meters neutral, and on runway 34 right, even visibility of down to 900 meters. That is obviously due to the smoke caused from the collision and the subsequent fire. Now, generally this tells us they had good weather at the time of the accident. So, if we now have a look over in the Microsoft Flight Simulator over here, then we can have a quick look at the situation in which the pilots were just prior to landing. So, let me just shift this to a normal view of the runway on the approach. So, here we are roundabout on the Puppy, so this is what the pilots would have seen on final approach. Many will be asking, so if the pilots landed, why didn't they see that airplane on the runway? Now let's shift the simulator here to entire nighttime to get a slightly better idea. So this is what it looks like at nighttime, approaching a runway where there is an airplane on it. Now there's a couple things worth pointing out. First of all, lights in Flight Simulator are usually a little bit exaggerated. For example, you could barely ever see the logo light of the airplane like you can see it right here in the sim. But what I want to emphasize on mostly is, as you can see from directly behind, you cannot see the navigation lights of the plane, but what you could probably see would be the white lights at the end of the wing and of course the strobe light located at the back of the airplane. However, if the airplane lined up correctly on that runway, the strobe light at the back would be aligned exactly with the runway centerline light, so it would be impossible to make out. And looking at the CCTV pictures and footage shown on the Aviation Herald, it was rather hard to see if the Dash 8 had their landing lights turned on or not. What I can tell you is that, depending on the operator, it may be SOP to turn the landing lights on only when takeoff clearance is received, thereby making it even harder to spot the airplane. Another point over here that is worth pointing out is that in the real world, with all those lights and traveling at a speed of almost 300 kilometers an hour, it is very hard to make out a stationary target on the runway. That is part of the reason why pulse lights are slowly finding their way into aviation, because they are easier to spot. But the important point to take away from over here is, approaching an airport at nighttime, the entirety of the lights you will see as a pilot can easily become rather overwhelming. So there can be a lot of very bright lights. We don't know what intensity the runway lights were set to, but what we see in the sim over here is a medium-ish intensity. They can set the lights much brighter. If that was the case, it might have been impossible for the pilots to spot the airplane on the runway at all in nighttime, looking at it directly from behind. Now, talking about collision on the runways, sure enough you will be asking, okay, so why has there not been any warning to the accident? Now that is a question which still needs to be investigated, and the latest information of myself was that on top of the Japanese investigators now looking into the accident, the French BEA, representing the country of the manufacturer of the Airbus A350, has also dispatched 4 investigators to Japan to investigate what has happened. Now, a few things, however, we can talk about already. First of all, according to the information given in the Aviation Herald, the 2 aircraft, even though on the same runway, were not on the same frequency. So if we look at this, we can see that the A350, as well as a number of other aircraft departing 34 right, were handed off to tower frequency 118.725. However, the Coast Guard Dash 8 300 was handed off to tower at 124.35. So they were on different frequencies. To give you an idea, let's have a quick look into the Navigraph charts over here to have a look at the approach chart, or rather at the general airport chart of Tokyo Haneda Airport. As you can see, looking into the frequency table up here, there is a lot of different tower frequencies available. And that is necessary for an airport of this size. You can see we've got 4 runways over at Tokyo Haneda, and probably Tower will be controlling a couple of taxiways as well. So a lot of different frequencies there, which is necessary when you got an airport as busy as this one. Now, the question, however, remains why 2 aircraft operating on the same runway were on different tower frequencies, and that is a question which needs to be investigated by the relevant authorities now. What we can say is that the 2 aircraft were unable to hear one another, which significantly reduced the pilot's situational awareness and therefore made it impossible for pilots to figure out that there was a different aircraft cleared onto their runway. Now, this information might have made the difference in this becoming an accident or this becoming an incident. Now, of course, it is just one part of the many of the Swiss cheese until eventually all the holes line up and an accident can happen. Let's try to see if we can eventually come up with a possible different explanation. Now, we've seen this from the perspective of the pilot on the approach. Now, the other question, of course, is why did air traffic control not notice anything? Why did air traffic control issue the landing clearance to the A350 while the Dash 8 was lined up on the runway? Now, there are several different possibilities of why this may have happened, and the investigators will have to figure that out, so we cannot make any clear statement by now. But what we can do over here is just to move ourselves to the location of the control tower at Haneda Airport here in Microsoft Flight Simulator, and just have a look at what the controllers might have seen at the time of the accident. And you can already see this is quite a huge airport, and we are moving for quite a time to get over to the tower. So let's just jump up here and try to look at what air traffic controllers might have seen when looking out of the window. So this is their view onto the runway. Needless to say, Microsoft Flight Simulator doesn't show you all the lights correctly, and therefore the view we see in the sim over here is not necessarily the same that the controllers would have had, but it gives you a bit of an idea. So what we can see over here is we've got a rapid exit taxiway over here, we've got another one over here, and over here is the displaced threshold of runway 34 right. The A350 would have touched down somewhere over here, and the Dash 8, according to the Aviation Herald, would have been located somewhere over here. Now, we can have a quick look into the graphics of the Aviation Herald, which we can see just on the bottom of the accident, and that's the one over here. So we've got the approximate position of the Dash 8 located just here in the middle between the 2 rapid exit taxiways of runway 34 right. The approximate final position of the A350 is just off the right side of the runway, located towards the opposite end. Obviously, the A350 was moving very fast at the time of the collision, so what we can say from here is that the positions represented in here are obviously the final positions. Now, the Dash 8, when the final wreckage is located over here, would probably have been a little bit further forward, and I guess they probably lined up through one of the rapid exit taxiways and stood somewhere over here, right in the middle of the touchdown zone, which is kinda confirmed by the time of the CCTV footage between the time of the A350 touching down and the fireball occurring. Now, if we look at that from the air traffic controller's perspective, what we can say is that the Dash 8 would have been somewhere over here in an environment probably not easily visible to the air traffic controllers, but again, the simulator might not necessarily represent the correct point of view over here. Now, the next question is, were there no technical warning systems of the runway itself? Now, many of you will probably remember the collision happening at Milano Linate Airport a little time back, where a Scandinavian MD-80 collided with a Cessna Citation, which happened in low visibility conditions. Now, after that, in Italy, as well as in most of Europe, it became mandatory for airports running low visibility operations to install sensors next to the runway so that air traffic control would be able to spot runway incursions. For example, at my home base in Frankfurt, whenever you are entering a runway without clearance, the pilot is going to get large red lights and air traffic control is immediately going to receive a warning as well. What happened in that case over here was that you had the citation taxiing from the general aviation apron. They were cleared to taxi via the northern taxiway, which would have kept them clear of the runway. However, they took the wrong taxiway and they ended up crossing or entering the active runway over here where the MD-80 was taking off. After that, warning systems were introduced, but we don't know at this moment if any of those systems were active at Haneda Airport or if the airport had such systems at all. We don't know that yet. The investigators need to find out. One last thing that I want to comment on here in what we know right now, and that is over here, the evacuation following the collision. So the Aviation Herald states that passengers of the A350 reported the landing appeared normal at first. After touchdown there was a thud and the outside lit up in orange. That was without a doubt the fireball that was visible. A first announcement was made, please calm down, followed by, do not take your luggage and do not stand up. There was no clear announcement to evacuate, however when other passengers stood up, they also stood up and thus escaped. Now, this makes it sound a little bit like the cabin crew might not have been carrying out their duties properly. That is a statement which I absolutely want to oppose. We don't know what happened. However, a first announcement, please calm down, together with do not take your luggage and do not stand up, sounds a lot to me like the cabin crew at this point were waiting for a command from the flight deck. Now, for the cabin crew, it's very hard to determine what has actually happened when something like this happens. So normally the cockpit will be in a much better position to assess what is going on and whether it is the safer option to evacuate or to keep people on the airplane. Remember that at the point of confusion just after such an impact, it is almost impossible for everyone inside the aircraft cabin, especially for flight attendants who have a very limited view outside, to decide whether it's safer inside or outside the airplane. For us, seeing the CCTV footage and seeing the pictures, it is obviously much easier to say like, yeah, you should have evacuated straight away. However, it is normal procedures that the cabin crew would wait for a command from the flight deck. We don't know within which time frame this happened, so perhaps this was only the first couple of seconds, and thinking about general crowd control measures, when people start evacuating on their own, then the cabin crew can't really prevent that. They will simply have to try to make the best out of the situation, which I'm sure this cabin crew did, seeing that everybody got out the airplane alive and only 14 people received injuries, which, if I needed to guess, and this is only guessing, probably happened during the evacuation rather than during the accident itself, provided everybody had their seatbelts on, which is not necessarily granted at this age nowadays. In any case, the announcements made by the cabin crew do indicate to me that they were still waiting for information from the flight deck. And going back to my experience training on the 737 and on the Airbus A330, it does take pilots a little time to run a couple procedures before initiating the evacuation. So basically when something happens over here like this, then the pilots will obviously get fire warnings. They may or may not be able to see the fireballs. They will probably not know exactly what has happened. So I wouldn't expect the pilots to know that they collided with an airplane at this time. Things are just going too fast in a situation like this. So what they will do is to run the evacuation checklist, which includes, prior to initiating an evacuation, things like shutting the engines down, firing the fire extinguishers into the engines, in order to make it safer outside for the people before they evacuate. So that is probably the time frame in which this happened. And before the pilots could make their announcements to evacuate, the passengers probably just stood up and began evacuating on their own, which is a natural human behavior, even though it is obviously favorable to wait until the crew of the airplane gives a certain command. So that is everything that we know about this accident at this moment. Obviously, there is a lot of speculation going on the internet, and there is a lot of theories at this moment. So all we can say this time is we don't know the details. I did try to put the information that was available at the time of this recording into context, but for any more detailed information, we can't really trust any source on the internet right now, but we simply have to wait for the investigators to arrive on scene, to start listening to the voice recorders of both the Airbus and the Dash, and of course these transcripts of air traffic control, and only then we will be able to figure out more details of what has happened. So that's pretty much everything we can say at this moment. Thank you for watching. Do let me know in the comments below if you want me to cover accidents and incidents like this in the future. And with that, I would now like to say thank you for watching. I'm wishing all the best to everyone involved, all the passengers and crew of the A350 to be able to cope with the situation, get the professional aid they need, and my deepest condolences to any of the crew members of the Dash 8 and their relatives and friends who have suffered in this accident. That's me signing off. Thank you very much for watching, and if you're interested in more information in this and in future coverage, then do let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much, and see you all again on, well, the next video, hopefully not relating to any new accident.